Reach out, investigate the pool. I want to investigate the pool. I'm gonna fix this right after I finish this cinematic, okay? Alright, roll it.
No! God, please, no! No! No!
Yo, fuck this game, man.
I remember the first time I ever played D&D. It was this potent and magical experience. It was like seeing the dawn's light for the first time in forever. It was my two cousins, my gorgeous wife, and my best friend. And we were all seated around my grandmother's dining room table. My uncle, who had been playing since he was a teenager, so the roughly like 30 years he'd been playing D&D, had set us down. And so the way that he introduced us to D&D was by having us pretend that in the game world that we were at the table that we were seated at, in the chairs that we sat at. And then these things started appearing, and then that's when our imagination could take off. I was looking into the kitchen. I was like, oh, I can go grab a knife off the cutlery rack. And he was like, yes, you can do that. And so then anyways, we were fighting all these creatures. D&D has a very special place in my heart because it is the most interesting and intense kind of gaming experience that you could ever have. But on the same hand, there is a part of me that really just detests D&D. And don't get me wrong, every time our group gets together and we're going to finally play a game, I am overjoyed. But yet there has always been something in me that just really doesn't like D&D. And after some thought and consideration, I realized that it was the dice. So a little bit of background if you're new to the channel. I am a storyteller. There are stories that I have written and narrated, I apologize for the narration, that are on this channel. And so for me, story is the most important thing. You want to have promises, and you want to have payoffs, and you want to have progress as your character develops from that promise to that payoff. There is something deep and satisfying about a story that has come into its own and you got to experience it. Now you might say, well, why the heck then do you not like D&D? We have whole YouTube channels and Reddit threads dedicated to just telling people's D&D stories. And therein lies the problem. Therein lies my problem. It all comes down to the damned dice. One roll can change everything. We have whole YouTube videos dedicated to helping GMs deal with the aftermath of a bad dice roll. And yet, on the same hand, it's those very same dice rolls that make stories happen. Stories that are unbelievable, that you could not have ever planned out, and they're amazing. For instance, the first time I ever took a crack at GMing, because I was so infatuated with the idea of D&D that I wanted to take it then to our broader friend group once my uncle left back to go to New Orleans. So there I was, a bright-eyed and bushy-tailed GM, sitting down with my friends and thinking, this is going to be awesome, nothing can go wrong. Needless to say, my best friend and his brother-in-law almost started a PvP match in the first room. And by the way, I was playing a game where it was just a dungeon crawl, and the dungeon literally had like 4 rooms in it. It was a story that I had taken from watching Chris Perkins. It started with going down into the dungeon, and then up on the wall was this stone dwarven statue that could talk. And it had a gem embedded in its tongue. Well, the guys had figured out that you could get this gem. Well, and so they were set up as a kind of corporation, because at that time I was also watching Acquisitions Incorporated and I was infatuated with it. So my best friend's brother-in-law, he took the wizard. My best friend played a monk because that's what he'd played in a lot of MMOs. And so those two ended up almost in a fight, and they were about to roll for PvP until I and everyone else was able to settle them down. And it was all over who gets to hold the gem. They didn't want to give it to the wizard because the wizard is kind of greedy. He's acting greedy. He's being greedy. He's talking about it, selling this and not giving it to anyone. So long story short, they go into the next room. There's this arcane ballista that happens to be sapient, and so it can talk to them. Well, they eventually disarm all the traps. They get control over this ballista, and then they like maneuver it down into this hallway. Well, the group decides to split up, so they send this ballista on the right path, which just branches and goes straight and sits at this closed door, and they decide to go through where the ruined wall had been broken down and go along this left path. And so the left path was a kind of cave that arced over, but ultimately both paths led to this large open room. Now, the floor was filled with ice, and there was this coffin and two braziers filled with gold. And beyond that, the walls were covered in orc skeletons, because this was the tomb of the orc slayer, and so they were going to get a shield that was really valuable. And so they make their way across the room, and the room was covered in this like sheet of ice, and so everyone is having to be really careful with what they're doing. So my little brother, who was playing the cleric, and then my wife, who was playing the rogue, looked at the gold, and being new players, or I guess not even caring, they immediately grabbed the gold and started stuffing it, which set off the trap, which animated the orcs. And so all these orc skeletons are like reassembling, and they're dropping from the walls and slowly starting to make their way to the group. And so the wizard has this brilliant idea that he's going to cast polymorph and transform himself into an orc skeleton. And so while this is all going on, my cousin, who's playing the barbarian, has gone over and seen that there is doors, and so he opens these doors, and there's the ballista. So they now know that both paths lead to the same place. And so with all these orc skeletons coming, the CEO and wizard of the group decides to take the shield and bail. And so he runs towards the door, and the only obstacle is the barbarian. And so the barbarian swings at him and misses. And so to retaliate to this gesture of unfriendliness, the wizard throws a fireball in his face, which also consequently knocks the barbarian down and sends him sliding. Unfortunately, he saves and doesn't go over the edge. And so we go around the table, and everyone's trying to figure out how to stop the wizard. And so it gets back to the wizard's turn, and he makes it up to the steps, and he realizes he cannot get past the ballista because it's filling up the door for him. He also realizes that the ballista has been watching him attack its friends. With dawning dread, the wizard realizes he's also polymorphed himself into an orc skeleton. He tries to speak with the ballista, but it doesn't understand what he's saying because it only speaks Dwarvish, and he doesn't speak Dwarvish. Being a game master, I said, look, I'm going to give you one persuasion check. And so he takes it, and he decides he's going to be funny because we had a gag running that he was trying to use persuasion and charisma checks by saying, is this your card? And he would pull it out, and he always failed him. So he decided it would be funny to end it this way. So he throws the dice on the table, slaps his hand down, and we all sit and wait. And he goes, is this your card? And he reveals it, and it's a 2. And the next thing he knows, that ballista shoots a torrent of fire and just engulfs him. Needless to say, the group had to drag him out because he was pretty much unconscious. They unionized while he was asleep, and then everyone was happy because everyone shared the spoils. And that was the story of the first time I ever GM'd. Now, I need to make a distinction here. I do like D&D roles when I'm the GM, because I can build mercy into the system. Now, I try not to tamper with roles too much. What I do try to do is give more opportunities or find workarounds, especially when the dice aren't working. And I don't know if anyone else does this. This was something that I picked up from working with my uncle, that we would do take 10 or take 20 if that was available. And that would just count against time, if it was even available. But as a player, I hated dice rolls. Like, really hated dice rolls, because it could upend an entire strategy that we had going and working for us, and suddenly it would just derail. What actually made me write this video was the fact that I was dealing with this in Baldur's Gate. And yes, I save scum. The first time I'm going to play through, I'm going to play and try to do the things that I want to do. Although, because of this video, I've learned to not save scum as much. So, let's take a moment and let's talk about what is the purpose of dice and that mechanic in D&D. Now, you might already know this. Some of you may not. But the idea is to add random chance into the game. Add an element of chaos. Things could go good, things could go bad, things could go excellent, things could go critical fail. And it's actually because of the dice that the game takes on this more dynamic role, something that breaks typical story structure. It creates unpredictability and uncertainty into a game where imagination is king. And in that regard, dice rolls are perfect. Yet that's not how we structure our stories. When we are writing or watching a show, there is an element of predictability. Our whole Western style of storytelling is kind of really embedded in intellectualizing and being able to anticipate what happens. This is why foreshadowing is so big. This is why anime also throws me for a loop, but I finally figured out how to deal with that, and that's another video for another time. You see, when we talk about narrative structure, it's just that. It's structure. It's rigid, but not inflexible. It is a way of ensuring that we don't have fluff, that we create things that make sense and are linear, unless we're talking about a story that thematically deals with the kind of chaos of life, or sudden downturns, or bad fortune. But even then, there's this sense of coherency. And so that was my problem. It was that I am someone who intricately understands how to write stories and story structure, and I'm someone who is a student of such things and always am trying to figure out how to tell a better story. And yet, the dice roll is antithetical to this. It laughs in the face of your plans, it laughs in the face of structure, and it makes things happen organically. And for a long time, that just really pissed me off. Until I realized the problem was not the dice rolls. The problem was in me and my attachment to the outcome. Now, if you've studied anything about Buddhism, you'll know that attachment to something breeds suffering. One of the foundational principles of Buddhism is the recognition that all things, including emotions and experiences, are impermanent. So when attachment arises, we mistakenly believe that we can find something that lasts, and so we latch onto it, and it's like grains of sand slipping between our clenched fist. The Buddhists then make the wise assertion that attachment then leads to suffering. We become attached to things that are temporary and cannot provide any lasting satisfaction. This suffering then manifests as frustration, disappointment, or a constant yearning for more, or in my case, a constant yearning for more story structure. And if you really think about it, It's insanely egotistical for me to be upset that this game, which builds itself on the merits of organic chaos, should be confined to something as limiting as a narrative structure. Because in the end, that is what narrative structures are. They are a limitation to provide focus to the story. But that is not the purpose of D&D. And so once I realized what I was doing, I learned to let go. In that instance, I didn't want there to be a narrative structure. I didn't want there to necessarily be a promise, a progress, and a payoff of any particular thing. Although, being human, we have amazing pattern recognition, and we can take the kind of organic chaos of D&D and look back and go, oh look, there was a promise, progress, and payoff, per se. But in learning to let go and just let things happen and not be bound to a particular outcome, to be willing to fail on that dice roll and not suffer the consequences, but getting to experience them, that's what changed my love for the stories of D&D, and realizing this is what truly makes them special. This is why we sit around and we talk about the glory games and the moments when we rolled the 1, we rolled the 20, or sometimes it's not even necessarily the dice roll, but it is the way that the dice influenced the narrative. That's what makes D&D special. And now I have learned to love it for that very reason. I hope you enjoyed this video, and of course, if you liked it, please give me a like, subscribe, give me your thoughts. Did I miss anything? Should I have expounded on something? I want to build this channel, and especially these talks, more on a kind of philosophical dialogue, meaning I say something, I get people who say something back. If you're a content creator, then make a video back and let's expand out, because there could be so much more here that we could draw out. And so in the end, that is it. That is all I have for you. I hope you enjoyed the story. I hope you enjoyed this thought, and I hope you have a great day. And real quick, shameless plug, I am building a science fantasy shared universe with heroes and an MCU kind of style storyline, though it's not like totally like the MCU, but you know, in its own way, it's like that. But yeah, you should totally check it out. It's got, like, you know, Witchers in space and a spirit binder. Yeah, and we have more coming up soon. So yeah, anyways, I hope you like that. Check it out. Let me know if you like it. And there's whole novels on my Patreon. Yeah, anyways, all right, bye. Talk to you later. Bye.